My name is Andrew Heiron, and I'm proud to welcome Renault here today. We have Curran, the Commercial Director, and Electric Vehicles Chief, Andrew Heiron, and they'll be offering their insights in the future of the car industry, both in the midst of a credit crunch and in the midst of a future environmental crisis. So without further ado, I'll hand it over.
Can you all hear me? Okay. When Amina contacted us, she said, "Okay, come and talk to us about electric vehicles." But I felt before we, as a response to the competitive pressures that we've been feeling, but I think if we're to be very honest, electric vehicles are very much the future. Electric vehicles for us are something that, being honest, will represent probably 20% of our volumes, and I'll give you some more information on that shortly. But also something that will not become a reality for the mass market until 2012. So what I thought would be very useful if our Commercial Operations Director, Len, joined us today, and very briefly took you through, if you like, what's been the foundation to this. Because what we've been through as a business particularly, but as an economy in general, is obviously a period of great turbulence and change. And really, the electric vehicle is only part of the story. I just want them to sort of take half an hour or whatever to position the changes that have gone on in Renault and what we've had to do with our network to prepare the ground, and frankly to still be here in 2011 and 2012 and to be here in a healthy position before we can even launch electric vehicles. So I'll hand over to Len.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. The first thing you'll notice is that I'm not local, so hopefully you won't have any trouble with the accent. As Andy said, what we want to do is just give you a little bit of background to what we've been through over the last couple of years. Before I do that, just to let you know who I am and what I do. So my name is Curran, and basically my job in the company is to look after sales and to look after the health of the network. And our network is our distribution network, so the dealers. We also are responsible for what we call deployment, and deployment is where we take what's a strategic action, we convert it through a sort of funnel into specific actions, and then those actions we apply in the dealership, and that results in something that you would see when you get into the dealership. And that sort of funnel, that transition phase sits with our department as well. Now, to give you a bit of background about Renault and our performance, Renault have got a number of strings to our bow. You may know that we have had a significant interest in Nissan, over 40% stakeholding in Nissan. We recently took significant stakeholding in Avtovaz, which some of you will know as Lada in years gone by. And although Lada don't sell in the UK, they still sell obviously in Russia and some European countries. We have another brand which we operate in Asia called Samsung Renault, and we have another string to our bow which is called Dacia, which was originally a Romanian car manufacturer who we bought over some years ago and have remarketed that product, having upgraded the production facility and such like. The other thing just to see on this slide is that you can see the two brands one brand in particular that have become much more relevant in the world automotive stage, which is Hyundai and Kia, and they're a significant force now in the world market, and particularly we find them in the UK. They're probably one of our biggest threats, because for those sort of developing brands, the way that they're likely to increase their sales is at the cost of the existing more entrenched manufacturers. They need to conquest, and we would be typically a target manufacturer for those sort of brands. The other one that's interesting now you can see is the amalgamation of Fiat and Chrysler, and that's brought that amalgamation into the world stage in terms of the volume output. And there's a sort of undefined rule that says you need to be in the sort of 4 million club to be able to really make car manufacturing work for you because of the very heavy cost of research and development. What's particular for brands like us is that we operate in what we call the generalist segment of the market. That means the average segment of the market, so the average sort of person that would buy a typical product. So we're in with Ford, with Vauxhall, with Peugeot, with Citroën, and what we've felt in this segment over the last probably the last 10 years, but it's getting progressively more difficult, is more of an attack into that segment of the market. First of all, we're feeling it from what were originally the sort of economy brands. So Skoda, which if we go back 10 years ago, just a cheap and cheerful brand, are now much more coming into the main generalist market. So typical consumers like you and I would consider those products on a shopping list now. Likewise with Kia and Hyundai, as they start to improve their product position, they're starting to come into the market. So that's squeezed our market a little bit more. In addition to that, we've also had the prestige brands who have traditionally only worked in the executive segment of the market, starting to come into the generalist market. And that's typically where you have BMW with the 1 Series, where you have Audi with the A Series. And these are cars that are now coming into the range of your sort of typical average buyer. So what all the generalist brands are finding is that we're being squeezed more and more. We have one response to that, because I mentioned to you earlier on that we have Dacia, and Dacia allows us to start to move more into this sort of economy segment of the market. But that is quite difficult, and this is one of the challenges that all the generalist manufacturers have. We now need to start thinking about how we differentiate ourselves in order to create our own place in the market, so that we can protect our volume and continue our volume moving forward. And it's something that Andrew talked about later on. It's one of the strategies behind the electric vehicles. To give you a little bit of a background about how difficult it is in the market, I'll give you the Renault story, but it's not dissimilar to a lot of other manufacturers and what we've done to get through what's been a very difficult economic situation for us. We traditionally are about a 6% market share. We used to have ambitions to be a 10% market share brand in the UK. As I showed you earlier on, we've got this pressure coming into the generalist market, so 10% is really unrealistic. It's typically going to be around 6-7% in a good year, and in a bad year it may go down as low as 4%. And the reason I say that is our product is a cyclical product, and when you're at the top of your product cycle, your product is fresh, more people want to buy it. When you're at the bottom of your product cycle, then you have less people buying it. So there is always this sort of constant movement in your market share, up or down. When we were at 6% a few years ago, we were heavily dependent on what we call high-cost channels. One of them was called Motability. You may or may not know what Motability is, but it's a government-funded charity that gives people the use of a car in return for a government allowance. So effectively it gives you a free car. It's very easy business to do, but it's very expensive. And if you're looking as a manufacturer to find some sales quickly, this is typically where you would go to find them. Now, it's an important market for all of us in our industry, but there's a balance about how much you really want to do. If you do too much, then you negatively affect your position. Rental business is also, you're not selling on anything other than price on rental, so it's nothing to do with your image, it's nothing to do with the desirability of your product, it's simply to do with price. And the last area that we were quite active in, if I go back to sort of 2003, 2006, is what we call tactical, which means demonstrators in the dealership. Effectively, it means a car that we sold to a dealer, but we haven't actually yet sold to a customer. And that inflates your performance. So it makes you look like you're doing 6% market share, but in reality, your market share is slightly less. The difficulty when you're doing business like that is it puts your margins under pressure. There's certainly a cost associated with it. The natural demand for a brand was less than that 6%, so we were effectively forcing product into the market. That meant that we gave our distributors very stretching targets. For those dealers to hit those targets, they were having to be more aggressive with the discounting. The effect of that is that you have less margin, less profit in the car. Affects us as well as a manufacturer. But more particularly, and the most important thing for a car manufacturer is that it affects your residual value. And the reason residual value is important is the cost of running a vehicle is mainly centred around the residual value. And what it means is you buy a car for £10,000, you sell it 3 years later for whatever the residual value is. If you sell it 3 years later for £7,000, you've got a 30% depreciation, it's not so bad. If you sell it in 3 years' time and it's only worth £4,000, you've got 60% depreciation. That's a problem for car manufacturers, because you end up compensating that with front-end discount, particularly in the fleet market, which is around 50% of the market in the UK. And the other thing we had during this period, because the pound was very strong, we had a lot of grey imports, and that meant that cars were coming into the market cheaper than our dealers were selling them at, and that also had the effect of forcing transaction prices down. And the last issue we had was the backbone for most dealerships is in their service department. That's actually the bit of the business that doesn't really suffer. It's fairly level all the way through. It's not as prone to economic cycles, because if you have a car and it needs a service, you generally need to service it. That's the backbone of the business, and we weren't getting the best out of that. And the other final point we had was we had a historical issue in terms of some of our product quality. It was more to do with the fact that the product was soft, which meant that after 3 years we were having a number of issues with it. That was an issue for us, and we had to deal with that as well. So that was the background. The effect of that was our dealers were losing a lot of money, our residual values were falling, as I said. We also were having difficulty recruiting good quality dealers and good quality staff, because the dealers weren't as profitable as they needed to be. And we had this historical issue of a product reputation that we needed to address. And all of this has been compensated with more discount. And that's a one-way road to really disaster for any car manufacturer. So when we got to this point, we knew that we needed to do something different. And we put a plan together that was a two-stage plan. Step one was to stabilise the business. And then once we'd stabilised the business, step two was then to go back into what we would call clean and organic growth. So that's growth that would allow us to be able to build our sales in a profitable and a sustainable way. So, excuse me for the graphics, it was a bright young person in the office that did these, definitely not me. But that was the plan. At the end of 2007, we were quite clear about this plan and we set off to do it. The plan fell into effectively 5 parts. The first one was to cut our sales into loss-making channels. That was the channels I mentioned to you earlier on. We made a decision to reduce our volume. Most manufacturers looked at us and thought we were crazy, because all they could see was our market share in the UK going down. I haven't missed a target in my job for probably 3 years, but we did plan to bring our volume down. There are very few manufacturers that plan to reduce volume, but we did it in order to protect the business and set a stable business going forward. We had to improve the quality of our cars. It was one of our commitments in 2006 to have our products ranked amongst the top 3 of our main competitors in terms of quality, and we're definitely there at that point now. We've achieved that, and I'll show you some evidence of that in a minute. Another issue we had was dealers that weren't making money. We set a dealer cost-cutting program in place to take cost out of the dealers. If the dealers make more money, we make more money, because at the end, our profit, our distributor's profit, are linked. If they can make more money through better efficiencies, we are not obliged to put so much margin into the product. We had a number of very attractive new products coming that were going to significantly change the offer that we had going to customers. And then the last thing we did at the end of this was what we call network re-engineering. So I'll just come back to these very quickly. The objectives of these were to increase profit, to strengthen the residual values, to increase the perceived image of a product. And you can only do that by having product that has got better quality. And then to increase our sales through natural demand. That means customers wanting to buy the product because of the product and not because it's the cheapest product in the marketplace. So we set off on this challenge at the beginning of 2007. At the end of 2007, very confident. What actually happened in 2007 was we hit the credit crunch, and that significantly changed the environment that we worked in. So we had to navigate our way around that. The credit crunch resulted in a drop in the exchange rate. For a car manufacturer who buys into this country in euros, that was a significant issue for us to deal with. So that meant that the business, the channels that we originally set out to cut, we had to cut even more of them, because much more of those channels were going into negative contribution. The other issue we had at that time was, you'll remember that car manufacturers weren't able to raise money on the world markets. It was very difficult. The only way to deal with that was to inject cash in quickly by converting your physical product into cash. So we had what was called in the industry stock clearance. As it turns out, in the UK, the way we work in the UK, we don't carry stock, so we weren't in that market. But all our main competitors had to convert metal into cash at any price. And the best time ever that I've seen in the 30 years I've been in this industry to buy a new car was in the last quarter of 2008 and the first quarter of 2009. Because car manufacturers were more or less taking any money they could get to convert product into cash. It was a bonanza for the dealers, because the dealers were making good margins at that time because the cars were so cheap. And the last thing that affected us in 2008 was, you probably know, that many countries launched a scrappage scheme, and that meant there was we eventually did in this country, but we were behind. But it meant that there was a big draw for the products that were being sold in this scrappage scheme, which meant in the UK their availability was restricted, so we suffered some effect of low availability. Nevertheless, we managed our way through that. So what's actually, what we're achieving now, if I show you some of the results, this is quite a busy chart. It'll take me a minute or two just to talk you through, but this is how the market is typically made up in the UK. So the green bar is retail sales. That's typically the percentage of the market that is where people buy a car as a retail product. The yellow line, the yellow box, we call vehicle constructor. What that basically means is a self-registration or taxable registration. It's a car that's been registered but has yet to find a customer. So it might be a dealer registering cars to get its target without selling them. It might be us registering cars for our own fleet of demos, but whatever it is, it's still to be sold. So it's registered but not yet sold. The blue line is LCD, we call that, but it's a French expression. It's rental. It's the rental market. And you can see how big the rental market is. It's very significant. Then the sort of solid grey line is legitimate, what we call normal fleet business. And then that little bit at the top, the sort of dark grey with the lines, is the Motability market, and that's about 200,000, and it's always about 200,000. It's not influenced by the economic situation at all. It's a very important market. It represents nearly 10% of the total market. And these lines that you can see running across there show you how we have traditionally performed in those segments. And you'll see all those lines coming down significantly, and the reason they've come down is because we set out to cut most of those high-cost channels of business in order to protect our financial stability. It also allowed us, because we're reducing our turnover, to reduce some of the internal costs. So we did make some people redundant, we did take some costs out of the business, but we reshaped our business to be much more efficient and much leaner. The important line there is this red line. The red line is our retail sales, and actually, although that did come down, it didn't come down significantly, and we didn't set out to significantly reduce retail sales, because that's where car manufacturers really make their money, and we were able to protect most of our performance on retail. In terms of quality, just to show you a couple of slides about where we've come over the last few years in quality. What this slide shows you is the number of breakdowns that we have on average per 1,000 vehicles, and you can see that the trend is consistently down, and in fact we're in amongst the top 3 now of car manufacturers in terms of breakdowns. It's just one of the measures that we use from the breakdown and recovery services. Warranty, which is where a vehicle has to come back into the workshop for repair under guarantee. You can see that the trend on that, on average per vehicle, is significantly coming down. And the last thing that we talk about when we talk about quality is our perception of quality with our customers. And although we're not where we need to be, our trend against the average of the top 3 manufacturers is improving. That's still got some work to do, but it's a much longer priority or a much longer objective to be able to fix that one. And this is just our own internal measurement of quality, and you can see that we're obsessed by this, and you can see that the trend is up. There is a delay reaction. Even though our products are good, we still get customers that are driving cars that they bought that are 5 and 6 years old, and they're still marking against the experience of the older product. Customers who are buying the product that we produced over the last 3 or 4 years are much, much happier and score is much better. Renault 20 was, just very briefly, a programme that we introduced to take cost out of our distribution network. It was called Renault 20 because the objective was to take £20 million in total out of our dealer network. It was a joint effort between ourselves and our distribution network. We took various costs out that we were able to, so we cut the number of demonstrators that dealers had to run. We made the programme simpler so that they could reduce their admin costs. And on the other side, those dealers had a number of actions to do. In the end, I'm not going to go through this, it will take too long, but in the end, we took out, we set out a target for about 140,000. The credit crunch hit in 2008, and we revised that, and that became 200,000. And at the moment, we can see we're at just over 300,000 is the average reduction in cost that a typical Renault dealer has seen since we started this programme at the end of 2007, early part of 2008. In terms of product, you may or may not know, we've got 12 models that have the Euro NCAP 5-star rating. I don't think there's any other manufacturer who has got so many cars in their range that have got a 5-star rating. If there is, it's probably only Mercedes, but I think they're probably even ahead of Mercedes. And within that, the current range of products are amongst the best in terms of scoring on Euro NCAP safety. And although we don't particularly push this message, it's one of our areas that we're very, very particular about is to build safety into the product. This is our model range. We've got quite a detailed model range. We cover all the segments of the market. The only market we don't really go into is the executive segment, and the reason for that is because that's really the domain of the German manufacturers. Lots of manufacturers have tried to break into the segment. If you think, you may remember Ford used to have the Granada, Vauxhall used to have the Senator. It's too hard a market to break into, it costs too much, the Germans dominate it, and that's why you see companies like Ford traditionally had bought their way into it by buying Jaguar or buying Volvo. That was their way of getting into that market. It was easier. In fact, Toyota is a very good example because Toyota introduced Lexus as a separate brand to be able to break into the executive market, and I assume that's because they recognised the difficulties of being able to put Toyota into that market, because this market particularly are interested about what the badge on your driveway says, and that's why Mercedes and BMW are so strong. These are some of the products that we've now launched. I mentioned that we had new products coming into the market. One of the rules in our business is that people buy with their eye, and not the only reason they buy, but it's the main reason people buy cars is they like the look of the car. May have other considerations after that, but most people, the initial interest is that car something that I like the look of. And these are the current range of cars that we've got. There's a couple, the one in the top, as you're looking at, top right hand corner, and this one here will be launched in summer. A couple of new convertibles that we're doing, but we try and design attractive products that make people buy them. This is just another one that we launched a few months ago. We call it the World Series, based on the Megane platform. And this one is the Laguna, and it's, you notice there's some similarity at the back end of that with an Aston Martin. That's the product offensive. For network re-engineering, again, quite a difficult slide, but what it shows you up here is, on average, it's thousands of sales by network. So if I take the example of Honda, you see Honda were selling on retail sales around 45,000 units, and this tells us the number of dealers, and they had about 180 dealers. If you look at where Renault is, we were selling around 45,000, but we had significantly more dealers. In fact, we had about 260 dealers, and you can see where Peugeot are over on the far right-hand side. The reason that slide is important is it means that there isn't enough volume to be able to feed the number of dealers that you've got in your network. So we had to downsize our network in order for the dealers that we had to be able to make a profit. So that's what we did. That's where we were. It shows you where all the brands are. The number of sales points that they have is rated on the axis on the left. And this is where we will go. So by the end of 2011, we'll have dropped from 260 sales points to around 211. In addition, at the same time, when we're downsizing a dealership, the number of dealers, we also looked at the size of the dealers, because one of the big issues for a dealer is if you've been built to do 10% market share, you have a building that's built to do that, you have rates that's in line with that, you have rent that's in line with that, and we had a number of dealerships that were just too big to ever make a profit. So we took the opportunity when we were doing this exercise to also downsize the dealerships that were going to be structurally unprofitable. It was a 2-year plan. It finishes at the end of this year. We're almost there with it now. It's almost finished, and it's working well. I mentioned residual values. Because we pulled out of those high-cost channels, there was less used product coming into the market. The product is better. It's distressed less. We don't discount it as much as we did. Therefore, the natural demand for the product is better. And the red line is the average of the industry, and the yellow line is Renault. And you can see that we're starting on a 12-month-old residual value, starting to see some progress on that. We're ahead, and likewise on the 36-month, we're starting to see our residual value strengthen. That's probably the most important thing for car manufacturers' ability to survive in a market, is to have a strong residual value. So the second action then, once we've stabilised the network, was to have profitable and sustainable growth. We'll do that through improving the image of our brand, and Andy's going to talk to you about that in a minute, about the impact that electric vehicles will have in terms of lifting the image of your brand. And we've gone from nobody really talking about Renault and electric vehicles 12 months ago to lots of people talk about Renault and electric vehicles, and in a positive way. So although we're committed to that programme, there is also a benefit, a side benefit, which is that it improves the image of a brand. People talk positively about Renault, and that has a knock-on effect in terms of the consideration for your product when they come to buy it. And we sell that product through less dealers who are leaner, therefore they can make a reasonable profit. This is the slide I showed you before. This is where we were in 2009, at the end of 2009. This is where the reason I show you quarter four is we always knew that we would come back to the market with more volume, but only when the conditions were right. And we started that process in July. And by the time we got to September, we could see the effect of that. So quarter four, you could see that our volumes are starting to come back. And this is our plan for 2010. We're aiming for just under 5% market share. It's not the be-all and end-all. If it has to be 4.5, it will be 4.5, rather than compromise the work that we've done in order to stabilise our business. But we won't be sucked into market share for reasons of vanity. It will only be because the volume we think we're capable of achieving sensibly will deliver 5% market share. And this shows you how we've started performing this year, which is, we call this year Destination 5, which means 5% effectively. And you can see the winners and losers so far this year in terms of market share gains over 2009. There's a significant distortion because of the scrappage market. You can see that Hyundai and Kia have had a significant improvement in their fortunes this year, and they have been the main beneficiaries of the scrappage market in the UK. Not the only, but definitely the main. They did a really good job with that. And you can see where we are. We've gained 1.3 points in the total market, but we've gained 2 points in the retail market, which is the columns on the right-hand side. The fleet market will come, but it's a bit slow to react. It takes a bit longer to build your image back up in the fleet market and to get the fleet business coming towards you, but it will come, and that's why at the moment we're doing slightly better in retail than we are doing in fleet, but it's just a question of time. And lastly, for our dealers, I mentioned that our dealers had a hard time. This was a profit curve for our dealers in the UK. You can see how it's come down. This figure here that went into loss, the industry actually for the first time ever lost money in 2008, and it was the result of the credit crunch that did that. We actually were bang in line with the industry average at that point. Prior to that point, we were behind the industry, but we were bang in line. And in 2009, you can see we did a good recovery, and we're in a good position to be able to continue to build on that for 2010 and beyond. So what's next for Renault? Andy's going to take you through in a minute, but before I hand over to Andy, I just thank you for your time and ask if there's any questions before I pass you over to Andy.
You mentioned that recently you bought AfterVaz.
A share in AfterVaz.
Yeah, how many percent did you buy?
Oh, I think you need to, don't quote me this yet, but I can confirm. Okay. I think it was around 20%.
Well, my question is, what was the considerations behind this decision, and what was the drive to buy part of AfterVaz, given that AfterVaz had a big debt at that moment?
Part of the reason definitely was the sale of technology, because what interested AfterVaz were looking for a number of partners. One of the advantages that we had was we very advanced engine technology, and for the opportunity for AfterVaz was to upgrade the factory, to upgrade the product, and to bring the product into the if you like, the 20th century, because AfterVaz still sell a much older product. For those of you who remember, they still sell the old Lada Riva, if any of you remember that, in Russia. And the main benefit was really the opportunity of technology transfer and the revenues that would generate. Of course, Russia also felt the economic crisis, so financially it's been a very, very difficult decision for us. We felt the pain of that. It doesn't mean we've given up. It was more to do with the market. We're still committed to that, and the market eventually will come back in Russia with better products. It's slow growing. There's no question about that. But the main reason was the opportunity to have technology transfer and the revenue that the sale of that technology would generate from them.
Yes, but what was the reason for your company, for Renault, to buy actually?
Well, AfterVaz were looking for a partner. We in our case, we were interested in the revenue of selling them our technology, but to be able to have that revenue, we needed to take a stake in the business, and that was the reason for doing it. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Otherwise, I'm not clear what the question is.
Yes, I understand the reason why AfterVaz wanted to sell.
Yes.
But
the reason for us is we generate revenue from, we don't sell the technology for nothing. There's a price associated with the technology, and AfterVaz would pay for that technology. But in order to get to that position, we needed to take a stake in the business. Any other questions? Okay, I'll hand over to Andy. Thank you very much.
I'm not blessed with a voice that works quite as quickly as Len, so we're probably going to slow down a little bit. What the actions that Len, the Department of Renault UK have done is provided, as you can see, a very, very solid foundation for us. And now I want to take you through electric vehicles, which is arguably the core feature of the discussion today. Just give you some background. I don't want to get into a climate change debate. I don't want to get into a global warming debate. It is an irrefutable fact, however, that governments have in different ways signed up to reduce carbon emissions. And for this country, Climate Change Bill 2008 set a level or an aspiration for the UK reducing carbon emissions by 80%. Now, one of the things that will affect that is obviously the decarbonisation of electricity, but the motor trade has a very, very significant part to play. Now, in the reports, one of the reports that was used as the basis of that, which is the King report, they highlighted three areas. So, use of cleaner fuels. I will never stand here today and say that the internal combustion engine, the diesel engine, is dead. It will be part of our automotive landscape for many more decades, but it will be improved. And by use of cleaner fuels and better technology, we will continue to get improvements. But there is a level to which there is a level which is basically a ceiling in terms of the improvements you can make on that. We also need to change consumer behaviour. So here I'm talking about things like the Act on CO2 campaign. Again, it's a contribution, but questioning unnecessary journeys, pumping your tyres up, car sharing will only take you so far and may deliver a strong single-figure percentage improvement. One of the big leap forward has to be new technology. When I say new technology, it's electric vehicles, it's hybrid vehicles, it's plug-in hybrids. I'm quite happy to talk about any of those. It is in the longer term, it's hydrogen fuel cells. A little bit later, I'll give you what I'm calling a technology map or technology timescale. One of the things we've been looking at before we even considered electric vehicles is our overall impact on the environment. So yes, this is a blatant plug for Renault. The point I'm making here is that most people trumpet their low emissions credentials. We've taken a threefold approach to it. So yes, we look at the emissions from the vehicles in use, but we also look at the pollution and the wastage associated with usage of water, pollution from production. So we look at it at the factory end, and we also look at it in terms of the whole life of the vehicle. So use of recycled materials within the production of the vehicle and the recyclability of that vehicle at the end of its life. And just a little point before I click the button. In the energy industry, they tend to talk about emissions lock-in. And by that they mean the power stations they build today, the cost of those is amortised over 30 or more years. So the power stations today will still be pumping out whatever level of pollution is associated with them by 2040. We have made, Len's made a big play on it. We've made great advances as an industry, not just as Renault, but as an industry in terms of the reliability, the robustness of our products. The cars that we're putting on the road today will probably still be on the roads in the 2020s. So we really need to act very, very quickly, because we are literally mortgaging our future. As I say, I'm not entering into a big environmental debate. I'm really making a point that the cars of today will still be on the roads in a decade's time. People will stand here and will give you lots and lots of figures for the level of carbon, the percentage of carbon coming from automotive. Highest figure you'll probably hear is around about 22%. That's for road transport, but that includes heavy goods vehicles as well. The more realistic figure is probably somewhere between 13 and 16%, depending on where you measure it in the world and what country. But it's fair to say that probably about 17% of the carbon emissions are associated with our business, with passenger cars. So now let's move on to electric vehicles. First point with electric vehicles is not everybody is saying the same as we are. What we as Renault are saying, and the slightly shorter gentleman on that slide is Carlos Ghosn. He's basically the main man for Renault and Nissan. Carlos Ghosn's vision is that by 2020, 10% of global car sales will be electric vehicles, and for the alliance, for Renault and Nissan, the weighting of that will be 20% of our sales. So we clearly fall into the camp of believers. Daimler being slightly less committal, but they're saying substantial. If you look at VW or BMW, the figure is low single figure percentage. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. The reason most common reason is it really depends on your own product plan, your own aspirations, and also your visibility. We obviously have very clear visibility of our own product plan, the number of models we're going to introduce, not in the next couple of years, which I'll talk to you in a moment, but in the generation, the next particular generation after that. So that visibility, coupled with your knowledge of the competition, coupled with, for some manufacturers, they believe, and again I'll elaborate on this very shortly, they also believe that the charging infrastructure, where you can plug in your electric vehicle to get it charged, will also affect the impact of that. Now, I have seen presentations where people will show these sort of grey tinted photos from 100 years ago. I'm not going to be quite that dramatic, but the electric vehicle has been around for almost as long as the motor vehicle. Since the war, there have been a significant number of electric vehicle projects launched. Most of them have never really become an economic reality. So why, the cynics in the audience may say, why is now going to be different? I think the first point is we are increasingly aware of the need to change our behaviour. Environmental, ecological awareness is there. Probably 20 years ago, the big debate that was being had was what happens when coal and gas runs out. And the dream was almost to find a very large seam of coal previously untapped and to just keep mining coal and keep using coal, basically fossil fuels. That has now completely changed. We're really talking quite strongly now about decarbonisation. But first of all, there's consumer awareness. And consumer awareness has to happen. Secondly, there's regulatory pressure. So the pressure, whether you regard Copenhagen as a success or a failure, at the end of the day, nothing was signed at Copenhagen. The point is that there is a willingness to move forward. There are also urbanisation trends. We, as a world, are becoming a lot more urbanised. Something like 2/3 of people will be living in urban or city environments by 2050. And finally, there are political measures being taken. Polluters being penalised and low emissions are being incentivised. So as I said, there is a carrot stick approach. This is what Len was mentioning earlier, competition. We are being squeezed by budget brands and we're being pressurised from above by prestige brands. The electric vehicle, for us as a mainstream mid-market manufacturer, the electric vehicle is a clear point of differentiation. We, as you said, covered off low-cost brands to our own offering in terms of Dacia, but we also need to rationalise our product range. Electric vehicles are, as I say, significant volume, and yet with a few additional products. So it's not a question of spreading the jam too thinly. So what's our vision? How are we going to make this happen? As I say, electrical vehicles perhaps historically also attract a price premium. So we're talking about mass market affordability, bringing the engineering power, the economies of scale of a major manufacturer to electric vehicles. Previously it's been very much a niche market. New technologies are available, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And also, we need to define our own role in terms of the energy market. And if that's a complicated sentence, all I'm saying is who manages the battery. I'm quite happy to talk about that. It probably looks like 4 or 5 different reasons, but if you take the time to read what's written on there, what it all boils down to 3 words: battery, battery and battery. And what has changed, what makes the electric vehicle more appropriate now than at any time in the past is lithium-ion batteries. So you can read all of those, but basically it's battery breakthrough. We have secured through a joint venture between Nissan and NEC, we have effectively an in-house battery supplier, and energy density, which is the buzzword, means that basically the battery of today, this is the buzzword energy density, the battery of today can deliver through a quarter of a tonne battery, which is not an insubstantial weight. I wouldn't want to be sort of fitting those manually myself. But a quarter of a tonne battery, when you think a full tank of petrol is 50 to 80 kilos, so this is the battery is 250 kilos. That 250 kilo battery will give you a 100-mile range. If you had a lead acid or a nickel cadmium battery, you could still have a range of 100 miles. The problem is, if you look at the y-axis, the vertical scale, what that is telling you is that the amount of power, the amount of watt-hours per kilogram of battery, is about 3 times more for a lithium-ion battery than it is for a NiCad battery. Go back to what I just said. Yes, I could give you a battery, a nickel-cadmium battery that would deliver a 100-mile range. The problem is it would weigh about 3/4 of a tonne. And you get to a point where it simply becomes economic. Yes, they're cheaper. Yes, they're easier to produce, but they are not the solution going forward. The lithium-ion batteries, which are a relatively recent innovation, are what gives us the leap forward in terms of electric vehicle technology. Now, part of the debate is as well about reducing emissions associated with vehicle use. Those are some vehicles from the Renault range. They're the Eco 2 vehicles that I was talking about, less than 140 grams of CO2. You've got a M2, so an upper medium, a large family car, 130 grams of CO2. We've even got now, as many manufacturers have, a Clio coming out this year with less than 100 grams of CO2 per kilometre. All very good, and that, as I said at the top of the talk, that will continue to reduce bit by bit, but there will come a ceiling. To be more precise, we will hit a glass floor. I was listening to an engineer from BMW. He was asked in terms of how far could efficient dynamics go. His response was, unless you fundamentally change the way we look at the motor car, the materials it's built from, the way we use it, the design of the car, he can probably improve in the foreseeable future by about 20%. So you will hit that ceiling, or floor, as I should call it, somewhere in the late 80s in terms of grams of CO2. There's a little dotted line that I put on there. For a plug-in hybrid vehicle, the benchmark is 75 grams. The government is putting together an incentive scheme, which I'm not going to get into the details of today. It was launched this week. It will be effective from January 2011. And to qualify for that, for a plug-in hybrid vehicle, so a vehicle which is effectively, it's an internal combustion engine, but with an electric motor as well in parallel, but it can be plugged into the grid. Hybrid electric vehicle is one, sorry to just get some terminology on the table. Hybrid electric vehicle is one with an electric motor and a petrol motor, petrol or diesel, internal combustion engine. The two work in parallel. You don't plug it into the grid. The batteries recharge from the motor. Plug-in hybrid, which is what's being incentivised. The benchmark for that is 75 grams. Right over on the other side, so very significant. The electric vehicle is a step change. It is zero emission motoring, measured, before anybody says it, in the way that we measure emissions today, which is from your tank to your tailpipe, i.e. emission in use. So to head off that debate, that's an efficient medium segment car, it's a Megane. We would state a CO2 consumption figure of about 120 grams. Under 120 grams for that. When you take into account the extraction from the point of view of oil, extraction, refining and bulk distribution of that, it adds probably about 15% to the figures. So even for the Prius, which is 89 grams, which is probably the leading and certainly the most celebrated eco vehicle around at the moment, the Prius comes out at just over 100. If you take your electricity from a good old-fashioned coal-fired power station, you'll be over 120 grams. The European average is about 67, and the UK we're around that mark as well. Gas becomes sort of slightly better, and when you get to the bottom of that chart into nuclear, bear in mind the country that Renault come from have a very, very strong nuclear grid mix. You're looking at close to zero. When you get onto renewables, you're at zero. Now the good news in the UK is, yes, we're looking at nuclear. Yes, we all know the number of sites, potential sites around the UK have been identified for nuclear power. But there's a very, very strong commitment from the government towards renewables. Their objective is that 30% of power, 30% of electricity will be generated from renewables in 2020. So it's the same time span that I was talking about in terms of the time that these vehicles will be on the road. It's the near future. Urbanisation I've already mentioned. At the moment, around half of people live in cities. In 2050, which is a significant milestone for us all, although I'll be well into my 80s by then, so it's probably more of a milestone for my children, to be honest, who themselves will be quite old. 2/3 of people, 70% of people will live in an urban environment. Another strong reason is that when you speak to people, everybody believes that they go on very, very long journeys. The reality, and a lot of people's reaction to electric vehicles or reservation about electric vehicles are what we describe rather pertly as range anxiety. The reality is that the average motorist, if such an average motorist exists, 7 out of 8 motorists drive less than 40 miles a day. So the electric vehicle, or shall I say the electric vehicle with a range of 100 miles, is a completely rational and completely appropriate purchase, choice of transport, whatever you want to call it, for the vast, vast majority of motorists. Yes, your rep, your person who drives 40, 50,000 miles a year is probably not for the time being going to be an electric vehicle driver. For the vast majority of people, it's a reality. So, in terms of reality, am I talking about a load of sort of tomorrow's world products that will never ever see the light of day? Middle of 2011, we will be launching 2 vehicles. Fluon, I'll give you a very brief overview of what these vehicles look like, or what the performance figures. Fluence is an M1 segment, a medium segment car, 4-door, 4-5-person family saloon. Perfectly appropriate vehicle. Kangoo van is your bog standard, if I can use that word in a hallowed academic place like this. Your bog standard. That's quite all right. Did you enjoy it so far? Thanks. Sorry about that. It's a Kangoo van. It's your standard jobbing builder's postal van. Twizy is a little bit different. It's an urban car. That's a 2-seater car, 1 person in front, 1 person behind. Again, it could be one of those vehicles that you see absolutely all over London, but it is a city car, it's an urban vehicle. And finally, what will probably be responsible for driving our volume is an I-segment vehicle, so a small car, Fiesta, think Corsa, think Clio, the Zoe, and that's launched in mid-2012. So in the space of 12 months, we'll be launching a range of 4 vehicles. I won't dwell on these slides too much because they're quite techy. The 2 key points I would bring to your attention. The range through the use of lithium-ion batteries is 100 miles. The speed is 80 miles an hour, 130 kph. So if anybody thinks that electric motors are limited to milk floats, golf carts and small things that anybody has seen driving around centre parks, that's not the case. These vehicles have linear acceleration, so from accelerating away from the lights, because of the nature of the where the power curve works, either quicker away from the lights than a petrol or diesel engine, unless you have for a normal car. Yes, I'm sure somebody will point out that there's an Audi Fluence, as I said, large size vehicle, 4.8 metres, exactly the same vital statistics in terms of range and speed. Twizy. This vehicle could not carry, in case you didn't realise it, a quarter of a tonne battery. So you've got a half-size battery, you've got a 120 kilo battery. It's a smaller, lighter vehicle, but it still sees a reduction in terms of the range of the vehicle, and also because of the limitations of the product, the speed is limited about 50 miles an hour. Again, it's still lithium-ion technology. And finally, this vehicle is almost 2.5 years away. It's the Zoe. So this is, the other vehicles are pretty well what you'll see coming to the streets in just over 12 months' time. This vehicle is a little bit different. It's a concept car. It will look more mainstream when it arrives. Same battery, same 24 kilowatt hour battery, so same vital statistics. Now, this is what I said was very different. If you look at historically, something we as motor manufacturers have been doing for a century and more, we're pretty good at, is we build cars. We also service, repair cars, and we also sell ancillary services around that. Roadside assistance, finance packages, and what have you. We've been doing that and perfecting that for a while. We don't tend to deal particularly with petrol stations. The oil companies have their own marketplace. The petrol station, in inverted commas, for an electric vehicle is your electricity supplier. So these are the people who will be and are already installing charging posts, infrastructure around London. That will, once the government plugged in places funding, which was again announced this week, 3 cities, which are North East, which is the region, sorry, Milton Keynes and London are already plugged in places. There will be another wave, another tranche launched later this year. But the energy companies manage energy, and they don't tend to dabble in the motor trade. But what you've got uniquely with electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, you've got this middle ground, which is the battery. The battery is an integral part of the car, but it's also a significant part of the equation in terms of supplying power and storing power for these vehicles. So at this point where we meet, we can either, as a motor manufacturer, enter into a partnership, because what we want to offer a customer when they come in is we want to be able to sell somebody a car, and they will sign up on some sort of mobility agreement which will give them so many kilowatt hours, or so many hours of charging, or so many miles of usage of that vehicle. So we can either enter into a partnership, so we can sell a holistic package, or alternatively, somebody else may move into that marketplace. Let me give you an example of who that could be. There's already a thriving automotive leasing business in this country. Their job is principally to buy vehicles from people like us, and they lease them on a pence per mile or pounds per month basis to their customers. So those are the type of organisations that could move into that middle ground, see a role for themselves, and frankly leave us to produce our traditional fare, which is basically producing motor vehicles, or you might find new entrants coming into that, new integrators in the marketplace. So that was, as I say, I brought that in because that is one of the challenges and one of the things that, if we're to be frank, we haven't got our heads around yet. There's still a lot of discussions going on. There are, as I say, new entrants coming in. A lot of people getting their head around that. So I've got no clear answer on that. This build slide isn't building for us, so probably by the time I've finished touching that, we'll be about 6 slides ahead. Right. What do I mean when I talk about infrastructure? What do I mean when I talk about charging? The vast majority of charging points out there will be standard charge. You plug in overnight, you plug in at work for the day. It takes 6 to 8 hours to fully recharge your battery, and that will cost you overnight £1.5 or £3.5 during the day. So pretty good value compared with the price of petrol. And that's where most people will do it. We estimate probably around 2/3 of people will recharge at home. Quick charge. Quick charge involves 3-phase electricity. It's fantastic if you're going on a journey and what we call pathway charging. In 20 to 30 minutes you can recharge 80% of the capacity of your battery, or you might want to look at it as extend your range by under 80 miles. That will, as I say, that will do it very quickly by shooting 400 volts of electricity into the battery. So that's where the big gain is. Three-phase electricity is not common in this country. There are parts of the grid that couldn't even support three-phase electricity, and the three-phase chargers are a lot more expensive than the standard single-phase 13 amp. So don't think you'll see those in every street corner. In London's plan, probably 500 out of the 25,000 charging points that London, the TfL committed to putting in by 2015, and about 500, so 2% of the total will be fast charge, quick charge. You need to be able to move between those points, so smart navigation. All our vehicles will come with satellite navigation, which will effectively, for longer journeys, you will identify the charging point as a waypoint or a point of interest on your route, and when you're driving more than 100 miles, you can plan your route around that. What is being worked on by the infrastructure providers is something that would allow you to pre-book that charging point. Imagine if you're going on a 150-mile journey, you need to charge halfway along, and you arrive at the same charging point that 3 other people are there for. I hate being stuck waiting to wash my car for 20 minutes in a queue of 5 people, but to wait for an hour to recharge your car. So that's a smart technology needs to happen. And finally, the little sort of pie chart at the bottom. When we explain quick charge to customers, because it's not widely understood, it's not widely publicised, 87% of people actually buy into the idea and say, yeah, that will make the purchase of the car and make it more appealing for them. As I said a few minutes ago, most people will charge their car at home, do their round trip, come back and recharge or top up the charge overnight. If you're driving longer distances, you may well do what I call here destination charging. So I charge at my destination, I return home, charge there. And for very long journeys, considerably longer journeys, reflect on the slide, a few slides back, which said for the reality for most people is they're not making a vast number of these 100-mile plus journeys. Halfway charging obviously depends on three-phase. So that three-phase electricity, I would see as being the type of facility that offers into a service stations. If the recharging network doesn't happen, or if it happens too slowly, it's going to affect the way this market takes off. What am I saying here? What I'm saying is that there are a number of variables that are going to come into play. So, can I access recharging? Can I park my car and plug it in? Okay? Depending on worst case or best case, that will affect the way we sell our vehicles. Let me explain what's going on the left-hand side first of all. So first of all, it's access to that infrastructure. The second thing is technology acceptance. That is quite simply, how quickly will people buy into the idea of electric vehicles? How quickly will electric vehicles become the norm rather than some niche product? So that is, as I said, that's an evangelical job that people like myself have to do. Attitude versus autonomy. Very, very simple. Autonomy is range. How comfortable do people feel trusting their 60, 70-mile journeys to an electric vehicle? And one of the things that will probably, and certainly if we look at what TfL are doing in London and how they see the growth of electric vehicles, they recognise that two-car households, where there is the fallback position of a larger, longer range vehicle, those will be the first people to come into the market for electric vehicles because they've got their fallback position. When people feel comfortable and are prepared to say, okay, my one and only vehicle is an electric vehicle, that will be be another accelerator, because that would bring a whole further group of people in. And all this is saying is, okay, if we're at the middle, so if we've got a situation where 80% of people have access to good access to infrastructure, 3/4 of people buy the electric vehicle up here. 80% of people can overcome this range anxiety, then the share will be about 25%. So 25% of sales could potentially, of our sales could potentially be that. And your peak year, if you move forward, if you take the optimistic scenario, if our peak year of sales with that vehicle could be advanced by 1 year, or if you take the worst case, it means that our peak sales will be delayed by a further 2 years. So that's what I said, there's a lot of attitudinal and infrastructure things which will come into play. So if anybody were to ask me the question, how many of these vehicles you're going to sell, I will say today, on the basis of the middle bit, I believe we're going to sell, I'll make up a number because it's all highly confidential, but 10,000 vehicles in 2012. If the worst case happens, peak sales will probably not happen until 2014. So this is why when I'm out there talking to electricity companies who tend to say, well, we'll wait for you boys to stick 100,000 of these vehicles on the road and then we've got a business case. My counter to that is unless you're equally brave and start to stick charging points in, then we're going to have a problem. There is a little bit of science in this. This isn't figures that I've made up. There was a report done by Arup for BER, Department of Business Enterprise Regulation, and the Department for Transport in October 2008. They highlighted 4 scenarios. I've picked the middle 2, which are called mid and high. On the left-hand side, you've got business as usual. So business as usual is basically pretty well where we are today. 1 or 2 cities have gone out on a limb and put in some infrastructure. There isn't much in the way of incentivisation. That would probably mean, I apologise, the focus isn't particularly good. In 2020, there'd be 70,000 electric vehicles on the road. If you go to the extreme scenario, 2.6 million electric vehicles. And if you look on the middle 2, somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million. I've got a summary on the next one of those numbers. If I gave you an example, what would move you from business as usual to mid-range? Infrastructure, access to charging infrastructure, government incentive, and also there's an economic driver behind this. An economic driver is somebody needs to basically say, it costs me, it's the equivalent to run an electric vehicle is to run a diesel. Once you've achieved that, you'll move into the mid and then take it onto the high range scenario. These are the numbers that we were straining to see. The interesting thing here is that if you look at 2020, electric vehicles are in the ascendancy. And if you look further up in terms of the speed with which the market takes off in those 4 scenarios, the further up there you go, you can see that the balance between the sales of electric vehicles against plug-in hybrids, note that point, gets to a point where you're outselling by 3, 4, and 5 to 1. Go forward to 2030, so on the right-hand, further right, you will find that plug-in hybrids will then become more popular. And the reason being, and funny enough, I probably organised this chart the wrong way around, but I was going to give you the technology map and then show you the resultant volumes. What you've got is, from 2010 onwards, in the middle range, that's what I'm here to talk about, is electric vehicles. You've got commuter electric vehicles. As time goes by, battery technology improves because there is a belief that the generation for a battery will be 5 years. So by batteries of today in 2011 will give you a 100-mile range. The next generation of batteries, which will be 2015, 2016, could see that range double. I personally don't subscribe to the argument that battery range will double and double again, and we'll have some super battery by 2020 that will deliver 400 miles. I think it will probably But as you get into the 2020s, with battery technology advancing, you'll have high capability electric vehicles. So it's parallel performance with an internal combustion engine. The internal combustion engine is at the top, it's the constant thread that runs through it. What we've got at the moment is hybrid electric vehicles. I just have time to explain those in a moment. And what we will have is what it actually says is low capacity plug-in hybrid up to 2015. So that technology will be available fairly shortly. Mass market plug-in hybrids will not come until the middle of the decade, and then they will arguably become the dominant force through the 2020s to 2030, which is why, as you see, the equation flips in terms of the proportion of those vehicles in 2030. I stated a lot earlier, right at the beginning, that as an alliance, one of the key things that we believe, and I also mentioned it when I was talking about the government's own levers that they see in terms of driving those four different scenarios, was affordability. Our model for affordability is really very simple. It requires a mental trick. Don't look at the battery as being part of the car. Look at the battery as being simply a fuel cell or a permanent supply of petrol. So our proposal to make the vehicles affordable would be to say, if I look at a vehicle less the battery, and I price it net of the government grant at the same level of the diesel engine. So my Zoe in 2012, net of government grant, which would probably be about £5,000 indicatively, net of the government grant would be the same price as the equivalent Clio. So my upfront purchase cost and my cost to, if I were to finance that vehicle and hire purchase or whatever, will be the same. I take my battery and I lease my battery, so I put it onto the right-hand side of the equation. By leasing the battery, I enjoy two benefits. One, I'm effectively paying for my battery as a running cost of the vehicle rather than a lump sum up front. Just to sort of scale that problem, the Mitsubishi i-MiEV is indicatively priced at £27,000, something like that. That's a lot of money for a small car. The reason why that, partly there's a premium to pay for an electric vehicle because it's relatively low production. But a third of the cost of that vehicle is the battery. Lithium-ion batteries, as I said, are very, very expensive. So you talk about probably £8,000 to £10,000 for a lithium-ion battery. That's a big old lump to take up front. If you lease that battery life is expected to be 7 or 8 years. So then let's talk about residual values and depreciation curves. It's an asset. It's not a thing of beauty. It doesn't depreciate in the way a car would be. It has a fairly linear depreciation curve. So you can spread the cost over 8 years, or the lessor, the leaser, the lessee, the lessor will take on responsibility for that, leases it back to the lessee. You've got a small reduction in maintenance. I don't want to get into a highly technical discussion. If you think about it, electric motor, you're not servicing, you haven't got fuel filters, you haven't got oil in the engine, or whatever. The electric motor is a fairly simple thing. So you've got reduced maintenance, reduced repair. Battery rental and electricity is cheap. I know we all look at our electricity bills and we all have a sharp intake of breath, but as a power source, it's actually quite cheap. It's considerably cheaper than petrol or diesel. So it's a relatively small amount there. So that's our affordability model. I need to be careful with my earlier slide because I was saying everybody lives in cities and everybody drives less than 40 miles a day. Because of that, battery leasing means that you've got quite a high fixed cost. If your car never turns a wheel, you'll still be paying £100 a month to lease a battery. What this basically says is, if you excuse the fact that the scale is in kilometres, there is a break-even point, probably somewhere between 7,500 and 8,000 miles a year, at which you may well still decide to buy an electric vehicle. You may well buy it because you you believe it's the right thing to do. You may well buy it because it's a lifestyle statement. And you may well do it if you work in this wonderful city because it saves you about £10 a day in congestion charge. I did a little bit of research on the congestion charge. Even if you took every single discount and bought an annual pass, if you were coming into London on a daily basis, it would cost you about £1,800 a year, £5,500 over 3 years. It would make that whole break-even curve completely different. But my point here is, don't regard these vehicles solely as being things that you run to the shop for 5 miles. There is a break-even point which is probably around 30 miles a day. We cannot do this alone. Our job as a vehicle manufacturer is to talk to people like yourselves, to evangelise, as I said, to bring a product to market that is affordable, is reliable, is robust, is well designed, but not so scary as a design proposition that it alienates people. But we can only do so much. What we need is a number of other players to come in to bring this reality of zero emission mobility. Government, both local and central, has a massive job to play, both in terms of incentivising the purchase, but also in terms of incentivising the use of the vehicles. So think about congestion charge, which we've already said, think about priority parking, think about tax breaks for the individual, benefit in kind taxation, the tax breaks for the company who's brave enough to take on those vehicles in the next few years. So there needs to be incentives both in terms of the use and the purchase of the vehicle. They also need to push the energy companies and push the infrastructure people to deploy that infrastructure as quickly as possible. The utilities have a role to play, both in terms of building this network, but also in terms of decarbonising their own power. And as I say, they're under pressure to decarbonise as well. Talked about our involvement, which is traditional motor manufacturing, and we also need advocates. We need people out there. And while I haven't brought you here for a sort of Billy Graham concert, what I am hoping is that you will go away with a clearer understanding of electric vehicles and a degree of advocacy. But we need people to basically educate, and we need to go over lots of the taboos and the sort of history and baggage associated with electric vehicles. So, you'll be pleased to know we are at summary time. Why are electric vehicles going to benefit us or going to succeed now? Basically, the time is right in terms of people's attitudes, the economics of it, the government willingness to accept, more than accept, but to incentivise these, to incentivise electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles. The time is right. Electric mobility is recognised as being basically one of the major contributors in terms of making that happen. Our role as Renault and Nissan, we work as an alliance in this respect, is to basically bring the products to market, to enable through our alliance with NEC to make sure that battery technology is available, and the R&D on batteries continues to happen, because as I say, if you look at that technology map, we have to keep developing the battery. And finally, we need those third-party actors, the energy companies. We need to basically have a joined-up energy market, so that people are not receiving umpteen bills from different energy companies. So there needs to be a degree of synchronisation there, and we need to, as I said, that integrator role between us as a car manufacturer, the battery, and the energy, so that we can offer a holistic approach to it. And I'd only ask for more than 1 minute of your time for my only blatant plug of the day, which is a very nice advert. If it works, otherwise you can go over a minute. Raj? Works.
Has there ever been a planning we share with everyone around us. For us, safety means more than crash test dummies thrown around during tests. It means people, it means lives. For us, global warming goes beyond the emissions coming out of the exhaust. It's an issue we address before, during, and after manufacture. For us, it's time to launch the electric car, to drive the motor car forward again. Towards people, and for life. Renault, drive the change.
Perhaps a little bit worthy for some people's tastes, but very nice. Okay, questions. I've managed to spin it out for so long that we hardly got any time for them, but I'd be more than happy to take a couple of questions.
In terms of your alliance with Nissan and your developing lead with part of a better place in countries like Israel, why?
I hate an informed question.
Why is it restricted to some countries like Denmark and Israel and not extended to the UK?
Okay,
You didn't talk about swapping the that.
Yeah. I have I've deliberately, that slide that when I talk about the infrastructure, I've deliberately taken quick drop out of that, because if I can answer your question in two stages, why Israel? Why will it work in Israel? Because the state of Israel has made a commitment that it will take 100,000 fluences that are equipped for a quick drop. So at a stroke, from a point of view of Project Better Place, they have a sort of critical mass which makes it worth their while. So there's a political and governmental will to make it happen, backed by an accord with Renault, which means that those vehicles will be taken by Israel. Please don't ask me how the government are going to do it, but effectively they've signed an order for those vehicles. And equally, Project Better Place are going to provide the infrastructure. I think part of it, I probably shouldn't say the personal view, at least part of it is the state of Israel also saying that we don't need oil. It's a very clear point in their situation they address. I'm a strong believer in quick drop, and I'll tell you why I'm a strong believer in it, because quick drop will become the petrol station of the future. It takes 3 minutes to do a quick drop. It's as much time as you would spend filling up at a petrol pump and paying for it, if that. But I think we have to be realistic, and for the UK, first of all, we're not market dominant. We're not going to sell every single electric vehicle, and even if we sold every single electric vehicle, it would probably still take us till the end of 2014 to have that mass of vehicles on the road. So I think you have to look at quick drop in terms of it will be something that, when a number of conditions converge, one of which is commonality, so everybody is using the same battery, which they don't at the moment, so it will require the same shape of battery and certain agreements between manufacturers. Will require a mass of vehicles on the road, which will then allow a company like Project Better Place to come in and build, because there is obviously a high upfront investment to building quick drop stations. So I'm not discounting it at all. What I'm trying to, although I preface some of my things with I believe and I think, what I've tried to keep today's presentation to be is factual and very much in a window of 2011 to 2013. And I see quick drop as being something that will probably be the second half of this decade. It's like a Mexican wave. Could I do it sort of that way? Yep.
Oh, electric vehicle is a new concept, new product. How do you, the market, do they accept that? Because consumer behavior is not easy to change. Consumer behavior, when you try it. Normal people, they will not buy that concept sometimes. Old people or some people. How do you make sure the market will accept that kind of idea?
There is, I think there's a leap. I think there is it comes back to that those different scenarios, I said, in terms of acceptance, I think there are some people who are already prepared to buy an electric vehicle. And I think the sooner we can get those vehicles on the road, so I think, if I could answer the question in three ways. One, there will be certain easy wins that we can make. So local government fleets, maybe a major rental operator, so we can get a volume of vehicles onto the road. So people start to see them and they start to become commonplace. There will be certain people who are more receptive to the idea of electric vehicles. And if I give you a very small example, when we ran that advert, we had people come into our customer services, phone into our customer services centre, not asking sort of questions about energy and things like that, simply saying, when will the vehicles arrive, how much will they cost, and can I have them on a mobility scheme? So some people have already engaged. Our job is to sort of broaden that as quickly as possible. Once we've got those people on the road and the advocacy there, then I think the key will be, within our dealerships, these vehicles will be available as demonstrators. And I think people have to just go along, drive the car, and realise that it's not like driving a milk float or a golf cart or whatever. It's actually, you enjoy exactly the same virtually the same performance that you would enjoy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I have two quick questions. The first one, you said that the average battery life is around 8 years. So the capacity or the range of the battery is decreasing? It's like depreciating?
No. Over 7 to 8 years, and we've got to provide to OLEV, to the government, information on battery degradation from battery testing. But what we are going to do is we are capping the capacity of the battery so that the maximum power of the battery will never be realised. So we're top capping it, so that as they imagine a degradation like that, at the point you get to 8 years, the top bit will have been masked. So we'll have effectively have like a speed limiter on a car. Then taking that forward, the battery's not, it hasn't gone to zero, it's gone to probably about 80%, and we've capped that top 20%. So the driver and drivers of the car will never notice a difference in performance. So that hopefully answers your question.
And the range will be the same? And
the range will be the same. The thing that will influence the range more than anything is if somebody were to continually fast charge, quick charge the vehicle, the battery, because what affects battery degradation is heat. And obviously 400 volts will basically put more heat into the battery, will generate heat within the battery, sorry, and that will affect it. So when I say 8 years, some batteries could well be still at capped capacity in 10 years' time, some will only reach 6 because of the usage patterns. Now we may well have to write something into battery usage contracts that limits people's ability to fast charges or something like that. And the other point is that battery is not useless at 8 years. That battery still has a high degree of capacity, so we're working with companies like plant, people will use it to store wind power overnight. Bear in mind my previous comment about increasing commitment to renewable energy in this country. And also, some people will still use the batteries because they don't need that range anyway. And also, we're working with companies in developing secondary uses for that. And I'll give you a clear example. A plant on a building site, on a construction site, needs battery pack. The challenge for building companies is to take away petrol generators and things like that from a building site, and second life of our batteries is one of the things that we use there. You had a
second question, sorry.
Yeah.
How you actually kind of replied that part, the maintenance cost of electric engine is like less than the petrol engine, but how strong the system is. The petrol engine is very simple, it can be repaired by any mechanic, it's like 100 years old, and it can work under any condition. When it's very cold, it works. When it's very hot, it works. It works on the sea level. It works when it's very high, like you go up the mountain. How strong the system is. For example, if you make a small accident, then the system stops. Or for a petrol engine, it's more strong. Maybe can we say?
The electric motor is very the electric motor is the same electric motor that we probably had in our toy cars. Well, in your case, probably slightly more recent than mine. I was going to say 30 odd years ago. It's a simple series of electromagnets and it spins round. There's not a lot that can go wrong. And in terms of safety, as I say, probably the greatest technical advancement has been batteries. That's why I made a big point of that. In terms of safety, we're targeting the same levels of safety that we would have on our standard petrol or diesel.
Two questions. One, how do you see your position compare with your competitor? Leaving aside the premium manufacturers in the volume space, I mean, I have told you VW are doing more focusing on, I don't know, hybrid or combustion engine. You're going to extreme.
Yeah, okay. VW are very clearly going for efficient diesel engines. They make a big thing about blue motion. BMW is the same with efficient dynamics. So they're looking at a clear engineering excellence in diesel, and they've really discounted. Those two manufacturers have pretty well discounted electric vehicles, as far as I can see from their product lineup. Other mainstream manufacturers, Peugeot and Citroën, are both taking the same vehicle, the Mitsubishi i-MiEV, they're giving it different names like a C0, and they are having basically one vehicle in their range. So I am biased, so this is my view. What they're doing is tokenism. They're saying, look, we're an electric vehicle manufacturer, here's our electric vehicle. What we're saying is, we're an electric vehicle manufacturer, here's our urban car, here's our i7 car, here's our M1 car, here's our city car. So I do see ourselves as being differentiated in that respect. In terms of the other manufacturers, I think what we will find is, as the market picks up, I think a lot of people are sitting on the fence at the moment. They've probably put a fair amount of R&D into electric vehicles. They just haven't publicised it yet. And I think if the market takes off, you will see a lot of other mainstream manufacturers coming in. And I'll give you one final example. I believe that Ford will go into electric vehicles through their light commercial vehicles. I don't think you will not necessarily see a Ford car, spelled C-A-R, as an electric vehicle, but you'll probably see a van first. Yeah.
So you talk about the UK give £5,000 grant from purchase a car, electric car. How long does that last?
It will last till 2014. It is from a fund of the 200 million, which if you think about 200 million and work it backwards, it will buy you about 40,000 cars. There will be an amount of money in 2011, 12 and 13 and into 2014 that they won't commit to that. What they recognise is that because with relatively low volumes there will be diseconomies of scale, so there will be a premium price. What they're expecting us as the manufacturers to do is, as our production goes like that and we achieve the economies of scale, we can naturally reduce the price of the vehicles. But they're effectively saying to customers, come and buy a vehicle now, you will not be disadvantaged because that grant is there. And the grant will be 25% of the price of the car, capped at £5,000. So they are linking it to some extent to the price of the vehicle. Does that answer both of your questions?
And do you think you'll be able to keep that cost down, to cut that 5,000 by 2014? That's quite a significant amount to.
I don't think we will do it overnight, and I suspect the compromise with the government will be that the grant will be tapered down because they don't want to write an open cheque. The grant will be tapered down and we will be expected to pay effectively a share of that. And if I give you an example where they've already done that, when they launched the scrappage scheme, which Len was talking about in May of last year, their headline was £2,000. The reality was Alistair Darling dipped into his pocket for £1,000 and they came to the motor industry for the other 1,000. So that there have been precedents set in terms of that. There was another question. question. Yeah.
Do you see a similar kind of buying from governments in Asia, like China and India, or is the philosophy the same as we have not polluted it enough, so we have more rights to do it? And if so, does your company have a model plan for countries like them? Because I see more and more people shifting to cities there, and a large part of the population still.
Okay, I've never been asked that question before, and I think, okay, I'm going to tell you what my view is. The Cars Go statement was 10% of the global car market will be electric vehicles. 10% of the global car market doesn't just mean Western Europe, so it has to be truly global. I think perhaps the vanguard will be in Western Europe for a couple of reasons. One is most of the government incentive schemes, and government incentive schemes are quite important to make it happen. If you think back to that sort of four square thing, so it really depends on whether the governments of China and India are prepared to do so. I think those two governments in particular have bigger fish to fry, because I think their electricity industry is still probably the worst in the world. And I think if you were to show a slide in terms of the where the carbon comes from, the automotive puts its hand up to a share of about 20%. Aviation is somewhere over here, it's single figure. Heavy industry and power is where almost half the carbon comes from. And I think those two economies, if they want to decarbonise, they will probably go for power before they go for cars. I think once they've done that, or they'll put their money into that, electric cars will probably be sold in China and India, but I don't think they'll be subsidised by the government. And it really is a question of how it's going to happen, but I think it'll just be behind the wave.
At the moment, there is only one product that is launched in India in terms of electric cars, and I wish there were more because it's really very highly priced compared to an average car.
I don't think, to be honest, that's an awful lot different to in this country. If you look at who has electric vehicles, there's a Tesla, which is a sort of £90,000 sports car. There are some niche commercial vehicle manufacturers, and there's a G-Whiz, which I'll let you make up your own minds on whether you'd like to be involved in an accident in one of those. So I think what will happen is one of our problems is that Renault are virtually unknown in India. I think we would probably be what you might see as a Mahindra car, or a Renault badged as Mahindra. And equally you might see, I can't speak for who Tata will pair up with or what have you. So I think it will happen.
But at the moment you don't see an incentive to launch a product because there's no infrastructure.
It would be so dependent. It would be so dependent on infrastructure, and there is this: who's going to move first? And the energy companies are not. They're quite happy to. They're happy to do tokenism. They're happy to put 12 charging posts up with their logo on it. But to get over this range anxiety, you really need to be able to sort of drive 100 miles. But I agree that the size of India, the economic status of India, the population, and when I say the economic status, I mean the improving wealth and consumerism, means that you cannot ignore the market. It's a question of how we can access that market. It's the same for China, because you can only really get into China if you have a partnership with a Chinese automotive manufacturer. They're not keen on people like us trying to muscle in on their market. So there are bigger decisions in electric cars, which is just how would a manufacturer like Renault access those markets.
I was going to add that actually Tata is developing the electric version of the Nano.
Yeah.
Right now, so it'll come. Just to add, Peugeot and Hyundai have
they plug-in hybrids? Forgive my ignorance. Are they plug-in hybrids or are they traditional? I see no significant, unless I'm